From the quiet plains of Mesopotamia to the divine call that shattered the tranquility of his heart, Abraham's story is one of unparalleled faith, struggle, and unwavering trust in the promises of God. His journey was not merely a physical passage across distant lands, but a profound odyssey through the depths of human courage, doubt, and belief. Abraham, the father of many nations, embarked on a path that would test the very essence of his faith, challenging him to surrender his fears, doubts, and everything he knew for the unseen, the unknown, and the divine plan set before him. Chapter 1: A Divine Whisper. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet plains of Mesopotamia, I found myself alone in the stillness. In that serene moment, a voice emerged, more powerful than any storm, yet softer than the gentlest breeze. It was not a voice heard by the ears, but felt deep within the soul. Leave your homeland and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. The words, though unseen, were undeniable, vibrating within me with an intensity that ignited a fire in my heart. I stood there, awestruck and bewildered, feeling the weight of a divine command. This was not a simple request, it was a call to an unknown destiny, a summons to step onto a path that was not yet paved. I had lived my entire life in UR, surrounded by the familiar, family, friends, and customs passed down through generations. To leave all of this behind for a promise unseen felt like leaping into darkness. But the voice left no room for doubt. It was filled with authority yet laced with a promise that something far greater awaited. The next morning, as I stood at the edge of my home, I realized that my journey had already begun, not with a step but with a choice, to trust in the whisper of the divine. Chapter 2: The Promises of a New Beginning. I, Abram, of Ur of the Chaldeans, stood under the vast expanse of the night sky, a canvas painted with countless stars. As I gazed upwards, the voice returned, resonating within me, I will make you into a great nation, and through you, all peoples on earth will be blessed. The words, like the stars, seemed far-reaching, almost beyond grasp. The promise was vast, grand, and seemingly impossible. How could a man like me, a simple shepherd, already 75 years old, become the father of nations? The stars seemed to mock the very idea, twinkling with a silent laughter that echoed my own doubt. I had no heir, and my body was worn by time. The very notion of such a destiny felt absurd. Yet, as I stood there, a strange sensation began to stir deep within me, pushing against the edges of reason. It was hope, a hope that defied logic, that refused to be contained by fear. Great nations. I whispered to myself, questioning the silent night. How, Lord? With what strength? With what means? But the voice did not return to answer my doubts. It simply left me there, alone with a promise and a choice. The path was laid before me, but the steps were mine to take. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs. Despite my doubts, I felt something new, a seed of faith, tiny but growing, pressing me to believe in the unseen, to trust in the unknown. With every beat of my heart, I felt the whisper of that divine promise, urging me forward. The next day, I gathered my family and belongings, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. We left behind everything familiar, every comfort, every certainty. I knew not where we were going, only that we were moving toward a destiny shaped by the hands of the divine. Each step was a step toward that promise, a new beginning. Chapter 3: The Journey to Canaan. With Sarai, my devoted wife, Lot, my nephew, and all our possessions, we set out toward the unknown, guided only by the divine whisper that stirred my soul. Our caravan moved slowly, laden with goods, livestock, and servants, but it was our hearts that bore the heaviest weight, an uncertainty that gnawed at the edges of our courage. We moved northwest, crossing the arid lands of Haran, until we reached the verdant valleys of Canaan. Canaan was unlike any land I had known, a place where fertile plains stretched far and wide, yet it was not ours to claim. The land was already inhabited by the Canaanites, their fortified city standing tall, their watchful eyes upon us. Each step into this land felt like an intrusion, a challenge. But I reminded myself of the voice, the promise of a land to call our own, a place for my descendants to thrive. We walked on, each step a testament to our faith in the unseen, each footfall an act of defiance against doubt. When we arrived at Shechem, a small town nestled among the hills, I felt a pull, a calling deeper than the voice that had first spoken to me. Under the oak of Moreh, a mighty tree whose branches stretched wide as if to embrace the heavens, the Lord appeared to me once more. His presence was like a warm wind, steady and firm. To your descendants, I will give this land, he promised, his words echoing within me, resonating with an unspoken truth. In that moment, something shifted within me. For the first time, the vastness of his promise felt tangible, as real as the ground beneath my feet. I looked around, seeing not just a land occupied by strangers, but a land destined for my people, for generations yet unborn. With trembling hands and a steadfast heart, I gathered stones and built an altar beneath that sacred oak. The altar was more than a pile of stones. It was a declaration, a concrete act of faith marking the beginning of my spiritual journey. As I placed each stone, I felt a surge of strength, as if the very act of building was solidifying the promise within me. The Lord was with me. His words would guide us, His presence would sustain us. We remained at Shechem for some time, dwelling in tents, grazing our flocks, and becoming acquainted with the land. Every morning, would return to the altar, feeling the warmth of the Lord's promise, knowing that, despite the challenges ahead, this was just the beginning of our journey, a journey that would forever change not only my life but the course of all who would come after me. Chapter 4: Trials in the Promised Land. No sooner had we settled in Canaan than the trials began. A severe famine swept across the land, stripping it of its bounty, turning fertile fields into barren stretches of earth. The cattle grew thin, the water wells dried up, and the people's faces became masks of despair. My faith, once so strong, was tested by the hunger in our bellies and the uncertainty in our hearts. I could not help but question, was this truly the land promised to me? Each day, the scorching sun seemed to mock our resolve, and every step became harder to bear. Yet, amid the doubt and suffering, I knew that this too was part of the divine plan, a test of endurance, perhaps, or a lesson in humility. In desperation, we journeyed south to Egypt, a land overflowing with abundance even as ours was parched. There, I hoped to find relief and safety for my family and those who journeyed with us. However, as we approached the borders of Egypt, a new fear gripped my heart. I knew that Sarai, my wife, was a woman of great beauty, and I feared that the Egyptians might kill me to take her for themselves. I turned to Sarai and said, "When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me and let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared." She agreed, trusting in me, as she always had, even when the path was unclear. As I had feared, Sarai's beauty did not go unnoticed. The Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to the Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. Fear clenched my heart, yet I held to the belief that the Lord's promise was still with us, even in this foreign land. For Sarai's sake, the Pharaoh treated me well, granting me sheep, cattle, and servants. But I felt no joy in these riches. They were as hollow as my growing guilt. The Lord, however, did not abandon us. He sent plagues upon Pharaoh's household because of Sarai, revealing the truth of our situation. In anger and fear, Pharaoh summoned me, saying, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." With Sarai restored to me, we were driven out of Egypt. The famine still gripped the land, but my faith was rekindled. I realized that even in my fear, the Lord had protected us, turning our trials into lessons, and our missteps into opportunities for growth. We returned to Canaan, no longer just a wandering clan, but a people tested by fire, our faith tempered and strengthened by adversity. Back in Canaan, I went once more to the altar at Shechem. I bowed my head and prayed, thanking the Lord for his mercy and guidance. I knew now that the path ahead would not be easy, but it was the path chosen for us. Each trial was a step in his divine plan, a plan that was slowly revealing itself, one challenge at a time. Chapter 5: Conflict and Separation. As our numbers grew, so did the tension between our herdsmen and those of Lot, my nephew. The land, though promised and vast, could not sustain both of our flocks and herds. The fertile plains of Canaan became battlegrounds of silent rivalry. Disputes over grazing rights and water sources became more frequent, threatening the harmony of our camp. I saw the strain in Lot's eyes, the unspoken burden of leadership, and I knew something had to change. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, I called Lot to my side. "Let there be no strife between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are close relatives," I said, the words heavy with the weight of impending change. "Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Lot looked out over the land, his eyes drawn to the lush and fertile plains of the Jordan Valley. It was a land that promised prosperity and abundance, green and well-watered like the gardens of Egypt. Without hesitation, Lot chose the valley and journeyed eastward, settling near the city of Sodom. I watched him go, knowing that our paths, once intertwined, were now diverging. It was a painful but necessary parting, one that marked the beginning of new trials for both of us. I turned my gaze westward, to the hills and the land of Canaan, rocky and less fertile, but still the land promised by the Lord. Alone, I built another altar, seeking comfort and strength in prayer. It was then that the Lord spoke to me once more, saying, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted." His words were a balm to my soul, a reminder that though Lot had chosen the seemingly better land, the true promise lay in what could not be seen. It was not the richness of the soil or the abundance of the valleys that would secure our future, but the unwavering faith in the divine covenant. With renewed purpose, I moved my camp to Hebron, near the great trees of Mamre, and there I built another altar to the Lord. Life resumed its rhythm, and the days passed in relative peace, but the echoes of the past lingered. News of Lot's proximity to Sodom, a city known for its wickedness, troubled my heart. The bright promise of the Jordan Valley was shadowed by the moral decay of its inhabitants, and I feared that Lot had traded peace of mind for fleeting prosperity. One day, word reached my ears that Sodom and Gomorrah had been attacked by a coalition of kings. Lot and his household were taken captive, along with all their possessions. The news struck like a thunderbolt. Despite our separation, Lot was still family, and I could not stand idly by while he suffered. Rallying 318 trained men from my own household, I set out in pursuit of the captors. Through the night, we pursued them, finally launching a surprise attack that scattered the enemy forces. We recovered all the stolen goods, rescued Lot and his people, and returned home victorious. As we journeyed back, I met Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High. He blessed me, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." I offered him a tenth of everything, acknowledging that this victory was not mine alone but a testament to the Lord's unyielding protection and promise. As I looked at Lot, I saw a man humbled by his choices, and though we had gone separate ways, the bond of family and faith remained unbroken. Standing under the starry sky of Hebron, I realized that every conflict, every trial, was shaping me into the man I was destined to become, a man of faith, not bound by land or wealth, but by an unshakable trust in the Lord's plan. Chapter 6: The Covenant of Stars. Nights in Hebron were quiet, with only the whisper of the wind and the distant bleating of sheep to keep company. But one night, the quiet was pierced by a restlessness in my soul. Despite the victories and promises, an ache gnawed at my heart, the unfulfilled promise of an heir. Sarai and I were growing old, and each passing year felt like a cruel reminder of what we did not have. One evening, I sat alone by the altar, lost in thoughts of doubt and fear. Then, the voice of the Lord came to me in a vision, clear and comforting. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Yet, even with such divine reassurance, my heart could not remain silent. "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" I replied, my voice tinged with sorrow. "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." The Lord's response was immediate and filled with grace. "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Then, he led me outside and told me to look up at the sky. The night was clear, and above me, countless stars sparkled, filling the heavens with their light. "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." His voice was soft yet powerful. "So shall your offspring be." I gazed at the stars, overwhelmed by their vastness. Each one seemed to whisper promises of a future beyond my understanding, a future not defined by my present limitations. I believed, not because it made sense, but because my heart felt the truth in his words. The Lord credited this faith to me as righteousness, binding us in a covenant deeper than any I had ever known. But the Lord's promises were not just about descendants. He spoke again, reminding me of the land he had sworn to give me. "I am the Lord, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." I listened, grateful yet curious about how this would come to pass. "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" I asked, seeking a sign, something tangible to hold on to. The Lord instructed me to bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. I did as he commanded, cutting the animals in two and arranging the halves opposite each other. As I waited, birds of prey swooped down on the carcasses, but I drove them away, guarding this sacred space. As the sun set, a deep sleep fell upon me, and a thick, dreadful darkness enveloped my soul. In that darkness, the Lord spoke, revealing a prophecy of future trials. "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward, they will come out with great possessions." The words were heavy, painting a picture of struggle and eventual triumph. Yet, amid this vision, a burning torch and a smoking firepot appeared. Passing between the pieces of the sacrificed animals, a divine sign of the covenant. On that day, the Lord made a promise, sealing it with fire. "To your descendants, I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates." I awoke, my heart brimming with awe and reverence. The covenant was no longer just a promise, it was a sacred bond, a commitment from the Almighty Himself. My doubts did not vanish overnight, but with each glance at the stars, I was reminded that my story was part of a much grander narrative, one written in the heavens long before I set foot on this journey. Back in my tent, Sarai and I sat in silence, staring up at the sky. The stars shone brighter than ever, each one a reminder that though the road ahead was uncertain, our path was guided by a promise that could not be broken. We were not just wanderers in a foreign land, we were chosen, called, and bound by a covenant as eternal as the stars above. Chapter 7: The Test of Patience. Time passed, and the years began to weigh heavily on Sarai and me. Despite the covenant, our tent remained silent, echoing the absence of a child's laughter. Sarai's face, once radiant with the hope of promise, grew weary, shadowed by the burden of unfulfilled dreams. Each passing year felt like a test, not just of faith, but of endurance. One evening, as we sat beneath the stars that had once filled us with such hope, Sarai turned to me, her voice tinged with both sadness and resolve. "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant Hagar, perhaps I can build a family through her." Her words struck me deeply, for they were born of pain, not doubt, a desperate attempt to grasp at the promise that seemed to drift further away with each passing day. I hesitated, torn between loyalty to Sarai and the weight of the unfulfilled promise. But Sarai's eyes, filled with a mix of resignation and determination, urged me on. So I took Hagar, an Egyptian servant who had served Sarai faithfully. And she conceived. The tent that had once been a place of waiting became a place of tension and conflict. Hagar's pregnancy, which should have been a cause for joy, only deepened the rift between Sarai and her servant. Hagar's newfound status filled her with pride, and she looked down on Sarai, whose barrenness now felt like a glaring failure. Sarai, overwhelmed with frustration, turned to me. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Caught between the two women, I offered Sarai the authority to do as she saw fit. "Your servant is in your hands," I said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Sarai, acting out of wounded pride and heartache, treated Hagar harshly, leading the young servant to flee into the desert. Alone and fearful, Hagar found herself by a spring in the wilderness, where the angel of the Lord appeared to her. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" the voice asked gently. "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," Hagar replied, her voice filled with a mixture of defiance and sorrow. The angel of the Lord spoke to her, not with rebuke, but with compassion. "Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The promise was unexpected, a glimmer of hope in Hagar's desperate situation. "You are now pregnant," the angel continued, "and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Hagar returned, bearing the weight of the divine promise, and in due time, she gave birth to a son. We named him Ishmael, a name that would forever remind us that God hears even in the wilderness of our doubts. Yet, even with the birth of Ishmael, the ache in Sarai's heart remained. Ishmael, though a joy, was not the fulfillment of the covenant. The promise of a child born of both Sarai and me still lingered, elusive and distant. And so, we continued to wait, caught in the tension between human impatience and divine timing. Sarai's bitterness softened over time, though the wounds of our decisions left scars. Every day was a lesson in surrender, a reminder that faith was not just believing in the promise but trusting in the timing of its fulfillment. We were not the masters of our fate, but travelers guided by a hand unseen, moving toward a destiny written long before we ever dreamed of it. Despite the trials, every evening we would still look up at the stars. They were a silent testament to the promise that still hung over us, a promise that, despite our flaws and missteps, was not forgotten. In those quiet moments, under the vast expanse of the heavens, we learned that the journey of faith was not just about reaching the destination, but about enduring the road that leads there. We were learning, day by day, that patience is not merely the ability to wait, but the ability to keep a good attitude while waiting. And so, with every sunrise, we found the strength to take another step forward, believing that the God who promised was faithful, even in the silence. Chapter 8: The Covenant Renewed. Years went by, and with each passing season, Sarai and I grew older. The promise of a son felt like a distant dream, fading beneath the weight of time. Yet, deep within, I clung to the words spoken so long ago. Then, when hope seemed all but lost, God appeared to me once more, renewing his covenant with a declaration that would change everything. I was 99 years old when the Lord spoke again, saying, "I am God Almighty, walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." I fell face down, overwhelmed by his presence, my heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. God's voice continued, reverberating through my soul, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram, your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful, I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you." A new name, a new identity. I was no longer just Abram, exalted father, but Abraham, father of multitudes. It was a name that carried the weight of a promise, a destiny that defied my current reality. And Sarai, my faithful wife, would also bear a new name. As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai, her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." I laughed, not out of disbelief, but at the sheer impossibility of it all. Here I was, an old man nearing a century, and Sarah, just 10 years younger, long past the age of childbearing. Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? I asked, half in wonder, half in bewilderment. Yet God's response was firm, unwavering. "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Isaac, his name meant laughter, a reflection of both the joy and incredulity of this divine promise. Then, God gave me a sign of the covenant, circumcision. It was a physical mark, a daily reminder of the promises that set us apart as God's chosen people. On that very day, I circumcised every male in my household, myself, Ishmael, and all the servants, sealing our commitment to God's covenant. The days that followed were marked by a renewed sense of purpose, though Sarah and I still grappled with the impossibility of it all. Then, one day, as we sat at the entrance of our tent in the heat of the day, 3 men appeared before us. There was something otherworldly about them, and I knew instantly that they were messengers from God. I hurried to them, bowing low to the ground. "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way." As they rested, Sarah prepared bread, and I selected a tender calf, preparing a meal fit for these heavenly guests. When they had eaten, one of them said to me, "Where is your wife Sarah?" "There, in the tent," I replied. Then came the words that would forever change our lives. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah, listening from inside the tent, laughed to herself. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Her laughter was filled with the same mix of hope and disbelief that I had felt before. The Lord, knowing her thoughts, asked, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Fearful, Sarah denied laughing, but the Lord simply said, "Yes, you did laugh." It was not a rebuke, but a gentle reminder that the power of God is not limited by human frailty. The promise was now set with a time frame, a divine appointment that would turn the impossible into reality. Sarah and I were left with nothing but faith, to believe that in a year's time, we would cradle our son Isaac, the living proof that nothing is too hard for the Lord. We watched the 3 men depart, and as they vanished from sight, I felt a renewed conviction in my heart. God had spoken, and his words would come to pass. Our laughter, once tinged with doubt, would soon transform into pure joy as the long-awaited promise unfolded before our eyes. Chapter 9: The Test of Faith. As the days turned into months, Sarah's body, once barren, began to show signs of life. Her laughter, which had been rooted in disbelief, transformed into a melody of hope. The impossible had become reality. She was carrying the child of promise, Isaac. Our household buzzed with anticipation as the months passed, and when the time came, Sarah gave birth to a son, just as God had said. We named him Isaac, laughter, for he was the joy and fulfillment of the divine promise. Years went by, and Isaac grew into a young boy, full of life and energy. But just as I thought my trials were behind me, God called me again, this time with a test that would pierce my heart. One evening, in the quiet stillness, the voice of the Lord echoed within me, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." The command was like a dagger to my soul. Isaac was not just my son, he was the embodiment of God's promises. The future of nations, the miracle that defied all logic. And now, God was asking me to give him up. My heart ached with a pain I had never known before, yet I did not question the voice. I had learned to trust God's plan, even when it seemed beyond understanding. Early the next morning, I rose and prepared for the journey. I saddled my donkey, took 2 of my servants, and with Isaac, set out towards Moriah. For 3 days, we traveled in silence, each step a battle against the turmoil within my heart. On the 3rd day, I looked up and saw the place in the distance. Turning to my servants, I said, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." My words were spoken with faith, a hope that somehow, God would provide a way, even in this impossible situation. Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice on his back, while I carried the fire and the knife. As we walked together, Isaac, sensing something was missing, asked, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" I looked at my son, my heart heavy, and replied, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." It was all I could say, clinging to the belief that God had a plan, even if I could not see it. When we reached the place God had told me about, I built an altar and arranged the wood on it. With trembling hands, I bound Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Every movement felt like an eternity, each second filled with agony. As I reached out and took the knife to slay my son, my heart cried out in silent prayer. But just as the blade hovered over Isaac, a voice broke through the tension, "Abraham! Abraham!" I froze, and my hand fell limp at my side. "Here I am," I replied, my voice shaking. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the voice commanded. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." I looked up, tears streaming down my face, and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. God had provided, just as I had told Isaac. I released my son, embracing him tightly, feeling the weight of the test lift from my shoulders. Together, we sacrificed the ram as a burnt offering in place of Isaac. I named the place, "The Lord Will Provide," for on that day, God showed his faithfulness in a way I would never forget. Afterward, the angel of the Lord called to me from heaven a second time, saying, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." The test had been severe, but it was not about taking Isaac away. It was about revealing the depth of my trust in God's promises. I learned that true faith is not just about believing in what we can see, but trusting in the unseen, even when it seems to demand everything we hold dear. Isaac and I returned to our servants, and we journeyed back to Beersheba, where our lives resumed. But nothing was ever the same. My faith, once shaken, was now unbreakable, forged in the fire of obedience. Isaac, my beloved son, was no longer just the child of promise but a living testament to God's unwavering faithfulness. Chapter 10: The Legacy of Faith. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy after that harrowing experience on Mount Moriah, but the echoes of that day never truly left me. Isaac, now a young man, grew under the shadow of God's promises, aware of his unique place in a divine narrative that spanned generations. The altar we built that day stood as a solemn reminder of God's provision and the depth of trust required of us. As Isaac matured, my thoughts often turned to the future. God's covenant was not just for me but for all who would come after. The Lord's promise was a tapestry, with each thread woven through the lives of my descendants. But my own journey, though guided by faith, was nearing its end. I began to think about the next steps that would ensure the continuation of God's plan. Sarah, my beloved wife and partner in faith, had seen the fulfillment of God's promises but was now growing frail. She had been with me through every trial, every step into the unknown, her laughter and strength a constant companion. But the time came when Sarah passed away at the age of 127. Her death was a blow to my heart. The tent that had been filled with her presence now felt empty and cold. I mourned her deeply, but I knew my responsibility did not end with grief. I purchased the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, facing Hebron, as a burial place for her, securing the first piece of land in Canaan for my descendants. This small but significant act was not just about laying Sarah to rest. It was a symbol of God's promise, a foothold in the land He swore to give us. After Sarah's burial, I turned my attention to Isaac's future. God had promised to bless my offspring, but Isaac needed a wife to carry on the covenant. I called my trusted servant, Eliezer, and made him swear to find a wife for Isaac not from the Canaanites among whom we lived, but from my own relatives in Mesopotamia. Eliezer set out with camels loaded with gifts, and after a long journey, he arrived at Nahor, where he prayed, asking God for guidance. As he waited by the well, a young woman named Rebekah came to draw water. She was beautiful, kind, and strong, a fitting match for Isaac. When she offered water to Eliezer and his camels, he knew his prayer had been answered. Eliezer shared the purpose of his journey with Rebekah's family, and after receiving their blessing, Rebekah agreed to return with him. It was a moment of divine orchestration, a meeting that was more than chance. It was God's hand guiding our legacy forward. When Rebekah arrived in Canaan, Isaac was meditating in the fields, his thoughts likely dwelling on his mother. As he lifted his eyes, he saw the caravan approaching. Rebekah, upon seeing Isaac, dismounted and veiled herself, a gesture of modesty in reverence. When they met, it was as if God's promises were being passed from one generation to the next. Isaac took Rebekah into his mother's tent, and she became his wife. Their union was more than a marriage. It was the continuation of the divine covenant, a new beginning forged in faith. As for me, my days were long, and my body weary, but my spirit was at peace. I had seen God's promises unfold in ways I could never have imagined. I had journeyed from the land of Ur, through famine, war, and trials that tested every fiber of my being. I had seen God provide in miraculous ways and had learned that true faith often requires surrender, of plans, of comfort, and even of those we love most. Years passed, and I took another wife, Keturah, who bore me more children. Though they were blessed, the covenant would continue through Isaac, the son of promise. In my final days, I gathered my family and blessed each one, ensuring they knew the importance of the promises God had made. I gave all I had to Isaac, sending my other sons away with gifts, so there would be no question that the covenant would pass through him. At the age of 175, I felt my journey was coming to an end. I looked back on my life, not with regret, but with gratitude for the divine guidance that had been with me every step of the way. I had faced trials that seemed insurmountable, but God's faithfulness had never wavered. My sons Isaac and Ishmael, once divided by circumstance, stood together as they laid me to rest beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. It was a fitting end, to be reunited with the woman who had walked beside me through every trial and triumph, and to see my sons united in a shared act of love and remembrance. My journey was over, but the story of my family, the story of God's covenant, was just beginning. Isaac and Rebekah would continue the path that had been set before them, and through their lineage, nations would rise, and God's promises would be fulfilled. As I departed this world, my final thoughts were of the countless stars that had once filled my vision on a desert night, the countless descendants that would come, and the faith that had carried me through it all. My legacy was not just in land or wealth, but in the unwavering trust in a God who calls us into the unknown and fulfills his promises in ways beyond our understanding. Conclusion: a journey of faith. As I look back on the path I have walked, I see not just the miles traveled or the lands crossed, but the profound lessons woven into every experience. My journey was never just about reaching a physical destination. It was about discovering the depth of trust required to walk with God. Each test, each challenge, was a refining fire that shaped my heart and faith. The call that first stirred within me in UR was not merely a command to leave my homeland. It was an invitation to step into a divine narrative far greater than myself. God, in his unfathomable wisdom, chose a simple man with nothing but a willingness to believe. I left all that was familiar, not knowing where I was going, trusting only in the voice that promised a future beyond my understanding. I learned that God's promises are not fulfilled in a straight line. They are a winding road filled with unexpected turns, moments of joy, and times of deep despair. From the abundance of Egypt to the barrenness of the desert. From the joyous birth of Isaac to the agonizing test on Mount Moriah, each moment was a thread in the tapestry of God's grand design. I came to understand that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. He takes our weaknesses, our doubts, and our failures, and uses them to display his power and faithfulness. In my moments of fear, God was my courage. In my times of uncertainty, he was my guide. When I faltered, he was my strength. Through it all, he remained constant, a protector, a provider, and a keeper of his word. The covenant God made with me was more than a promise of land or descendants. It was a testament to the relationship between God and man, a relationship built on trust, obedience, and a willingness to step into the unknown. I realized that the true essence of faith is not found in knowing the end, but in trusting God with every step, even when the path is unclear. I leave this world knowing that my journey was not in vain. The legacy I pass on is not just one of bloodlines or possessions, but of faith that endures. My descendants will continue to walk the path I began, facing their own trials and tests, but I am confident that the same God who guided me will be with them as well. My story is one of a man who dared to believe in the impossible, who trusted in the unseen, and who learned that with God, all things are possible. It is a story of a God who calls us not because of our greatness, but because of his love, a love that reaches across time, generations, and all human understanding. As I rest now, beside my beloved Sarah, I do so with peace in my heart. The stars that once seemed countless now represent the countless lives that will be touched by the promise given to me. My journey has come full circle, and I am grateful to have been a part of God's plan. To those who come after me, may my story be a beacon of hope. May it remind you that no matter how daunting the journey, how impossible the promise, or how deep the doubt, God is faithful. He sees beyond our fears, He walks beside us in every trial. And He never, ever fails to keep His word. I am Abraham, servant of the Most High God, a man of faith, and a witness to His unending grace.